All right. Today's daf looks like it's daf samach, Mistach Psachim. Moving along, we got probably I think it's 30 blot or so. Yeah, another 30 blot of kudshim, which is fine. We'll roll with it another month or so. We got to the Mishnah on the bottom. Actually, hopefully we'll get to the Mishnah on the top of Samach Aleph, Amar Aleph. We'll see if we can get there. So let's start off. The Mishnah says towards Nun Tes Amud Beis at the bottom, I don't know, maybe 8 lines or so from the bottom, 9 lines. So it says, HaPesach sheshachtu shelo lishma. Pesach. Now we know by Karbanos, just a little chazar, there's basically 4 main avodas, right? There's 4 main parts, and during these parts, it has to be brought for the correct purposes. If it's brought with the improper intentions, it can cause issues such as pigel, which we're not going to get into today, but it could passel the korban, all right? So these 4 parts are the shechita, right? The actual cutting of the neck, the shechita, the slaughtering of the animal. Then there is the Kabbalah, right? That is the Kabbalas Hadam, the receiving of the blood in a receptacle. Then there is the Halicha, taking over the blood to the Mizbeach is another avoda. And all these have to be, I'm going to not make that line. And that's number 3. And then number 4 is applying the blood on the Mizbeach called the Zrika. So those are the 4 avodas we're going to be talking about, referring to avodos. The avoda of, so these are the 4 avodas that are performed on all sacrifices, especially animal ones. So if it was shechted, the Korban Pesach was shechted, shelo lishmo, it wasn't for Korban Pesach. In other words, the guy was doing the shechita, was thinking it was going to be for a shlamim. All right, well, that would be a classic case. We'll just talk about a shlamim versus a Pesach. Ha-Pesach shechted shelo lishmo, or the kibul v'halach v'zarek shelo lishmo. Or if it was done, any of the other avodas were done shelo lishma. Oh, lishma v'shelo lishma. Or first it was lishma and then it was lo lishma. Oh, shelo lishma v'lo lishma. Or it was started off shelo lishma, right? Let's say for a case of a shlamim, and then all of a sudden he realized, oh, this is going to be for Korban Pesach. So it went from shelo lishma lishma. All these cases are puzzle. Okay, so whether it's completely shelo lishma, or it's a combination of lishma of shelo lishma or shelo lishma of lishma, depending on the order, which is the Gemara is going to analyze. All those cases, it passes the Korban Pesach. So ketzad lishma of shelo lishma. What's the case of that? It's first lishma and shelo lishma. So it says l'shem Pesach with l'shem shlamim, right? He has it in mind. It's going to be for Korban Pesach, and he's also going to have in mind. And then afterwards, following that, he has in mind this is going to be for shlamim. And shelo lishma v'lishma. What's the case of? It's shelo lishma and lishma. So the shem shlamim, right, which is the improper one for the shlamim, versus the shem pesach, and then it's the shem pesach. Once again, these cases are possible. Fine. So that was the Mishnah, right? There's the foundation of today's blot. Now, boy, Rav Papa Rabava asks kasha. Bi'avoda achas tanan o b'shtei avodas tanan. So this is going to be the kasha we're going to analyze for the next amud. Is this improper tensions, right? Are they occurring during the same avoda? Right, when he has 2 intentions, right? Lishma, lo lishma, or vice versa, because we're going to analyze which one comes first, or shlo lishma versus lishma. So, is it taking place in the same avoda? So he's slaughtering the animal, right? And then he thinks, okay, this is for a Korban Pesach, and while he's still slaughtering, he says, oh, this is going to be for a shlamim. All right, is he doing that? So, Rapa b'avoda achas tanan, or b'shtei avodas tanan. B'avoda achas tanan, is it during one avoda? V'Rabbi Yosi, and it's only according to Rabbi Yosi. Damar af be'gemar devar of Adam nitfas, and it would only be according to Rabbi Yosi, because as machlokes in Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Meir, basically a person can't have, say, 2 things or 2 thoughts at simultaneously. There has to be an order. So therefore, even though one occurs before the other, both of them are his actual thoughts, and therefore, even though it didn't come out first, it came out second. That was also his initial intention, and therefore it passes it, right? And that would be according to Rabbi Yosi. And therefore, Rabbi Yosi damar af be'gemar dvar of Adam nitfas, even though his second intention was really still a part of his initial intention, i.e., but he just couldn't state it in the first place together, because you can only say one thing at a time. And why? Rabbi Meir, because if it was Rabbi Meir, Ha'amar tavas lasharishan, according to Rabbi Meir, if a person thinks, right, something is going to be for one korban, and then he says for another korban, even if it's the same avoda, you always go according to the first thing. So according to Rabbi Meir, if it was one avoda, and he thought it's going to be for the Korban Pesach, and then he says it's going to be for shlamim, that second thought or statement doesn't take effect because it's already a Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach can't turn into another animal, right? So according to Meir, wouldn't be a kasha, right? So in other words, O Dilma, or perhaps top of the page, Dilma b'shtei avodos tanan. Even maybe we're talking about when he said he had two different intentions. One was the Korban Pesach, that was referring to during the Shechita. And the second was let's say during the receiving of the blood, he said this is going to be for a shlamim, right? And even according to Meir, who we just mentioned earlier, Meir says that you have two simultaneous statements said, because you can't say two things simultaneously, so one comes to the other, but that which you said first is the main part. That's only said when it's done for one avoda, i.e. during the slaughtering, right? Or the Kabbalah Sadam. But if it was during the two different avodas, then even according to Meir, right, a later intention could passel an earlier, a previous machshava. So Amri, they said, yeah. So now, which case are we asking on? Let's do a little further analyzation before we start to begin to this answer. So, if we're talking about a case where he first had intentions of shalol lishma, he had first intentions, it was going to be a regular shlamim. And then he thought, okay, this is going to be my Korban Pesach. So, bein bi'avod achas, bein b'shtei avodos, bein l'Rab Meir, bein l'Rab Yosi, if solei mikamaisa, right? Well, once he thinks, right, according to everybody, once he thinks the first one, right, shalol lishma, this is going to be my shlamim, he just ruined the Korban Pesach. Right? Even according to Rabbi Yosi, he would still hold that, that which he said first, right, is still really, that he's chayiv, or that his intentions in the beginning will count. So Ella, rather, we must be talking a case of lishma, shalol lishma. Rather, we're talking, the question is, if he first intends to say, okay, this is me for Korban Pesach, and then later on, he has another thought, this is going to be for shlamim, does that ruin it? Or can you say, oh no, he basically thought it was going to be for the Korban Pesach, and therefore it's basically locked in, and another machshava will not affect it. So what's the case? So what are we talking about here? So Tashma, so now the Gemara is going to try and give four different proofs to try and shed light on the nature of if we're talking about during one avoda, are the two machshavas, or even during two, or is it two avodas? Now, Tashma, come listen. HaPesach sheshachtu shalol lishma. V'kibel v'hilach v'zarek shalol lishma. If you have a case of a Korban Pesach, it was shechted shalol lishma, right? It was shechted for shlamim. And then he did the Kabbalah, the Halicha, the Zrika, also Shalal Yishma. So if it's just like we said, so Lamali Adam Machshav Lakulu. Why do you have to say he had bad machshava during the Kabbalah, the Zrika, right, the Halicha, right? He already had bad machshava during the Shechita. It ruined it from step one, right? There's 4 steps. He already ruined the step 1. Why does he have to continue to ruin it during step 2 or 3 and 4? So Lamali Adam Machshav Lakulu. V'kamaisa yivsuluhu. So Elalav, rather Hachitan, this is what it means to say, HaPesach sheshachtu shalol lishma. If a Korban Pesach was shechted shalol lishma, inami, or even if it was now inami shechted lishma, maybe it was shechted lishma for the Korban Pesach. And then the kibel v'hilach v'zar shalol lishma, and then steps 2, 3, and 4 were shalol lishma. Inami, or shachtu v'kibel v'hilech lishma, or maybe he even did steps 1 and 2 were lishma, or even steps 1, 2, and 3 lishma. The zorak shalol lishma. Then the final step number 4 was shalol lishma. Dahavi le shtei avodos. That is the case of shtei avodos. In other words, he that which he had, the shalol lishma intentions, were for its own avoda, right? One of the steps, right? He said there's 4 steps, right? 1, 2, 3, and 4. So whether or not he started off good on only the first one, and then 2, 3, and 4 were bad, or 1 and 2 were good and 3 and 4 were bad, or 1, 2, and 3 were good and 4 was bad, that which we said was bad was not a joint machshava with a good machshava in one of the steps. Rather, it was its own step, and therefore that's the case. So so therefore we see that which we say shalol lishma is we're only talking about a case of where he has a machshava of shalol lishma, let's say for a shlamim, in one of the 4 steps on its own. So Gemara says, well, aim a sefer. Let's look at the sefer over there. It says lishma v'shalol lishma. If it's a case of lishma and shalol lishma. So heichidami, what's the case of first he has lishma, but those lishma heichidami inem shtei avodos hainu reisha. Well, that's the same thing as the reishas we just mentioned. It's elalav avodah achas. It must be maybe we're talking about during the avoda achas, during one avoda, he has first intentions of lishma, and then shalol lishma. Rabbi Yossi damar afek mar dvar adam nitfas, and therefore the reason why it's no good is because according to Rabbi Yossi, who says we even use the second second machshava, right? The second intentions, and therefore that intentions would paslet. So the Gemara says, no, maybe that's not the case. Really, we're talking about the shtei avodos. The reisha the kai b'shchita v'kachamish b'shchita. In the case, the reisha is when he's going ahead and he's doing the shchita. So he's thinking about this shchita. I'm doing the machshava, right? This shchita I'm doing it for the Shem Karan Pesach. Inami kai b'zrika v'kavim machashe b'zrika, and he's thinking about this zrika. I'm throwing this blood for the sake of that. It's a seifa. However, the kai b'shchita v'chashe b'zrika. But maybe what's the chiddush of the seifa? The seifa is talking about a case of where he's doing the shchita, and he says, "Okay, I'm shechting this animal for my Korban Pesach, v'chashe b'zrika," and then he thinks, "I'm going to go ahead and do the zrika, and I'm going to throw the blood for the sake of a shlomim." Right? Now I'll basically get 2 for 1. So in other words, he's using the machshava during one avoda, during step 1, for a step later on, for steps 2, 3, or 4. And that, and the chiddush over here is that even though he's having both machshavas during one step, but he's having that machshava for another step, right? The kamash balon, the machshava mi'avoda levoda, and therefore we can learn from over here that one can think about from one avoda to another, basically ruin another avoda, even though I didn't get to the sprinkling yet. But if I'm going ahead and shechting for my Korban Pesach, thinking I'm going to spill the blood, right, or sprinkle the blood for a shlomim, right? Even though I didn't get to the sprinkling yet, I already ruined the korban. V'hainu boy de Rav Papa. And that's a shaila that Rav Papa asks over there in Mistakas Zvachim, and this would answer up that there is machshava me'avoda li'avoda. So now, basically, what we just did is we just said, no, who says that we're talking about bi'avoda achas? Maybe our Mishnah is still talking about when it's 2 different avodas is when he has the 2 different machshavas. So Toshma, come and listen. We'll try and bring another proof. So lishalo lishma v'lishma pasel. It says over there if he has machshava shalo lishma and then he has machshava of lishma, then it's pasel. So hey, what's the case there? If you say it's referring to shtei avodos. Hashta lishma shlo lishma amar pasel shlo lishma lishma mibai. I understand. Why does our Mishnah bring a seifa? If the Mishnah brings a case of where it starts off good and then you could ruin it, it's no good. Obviously, if it starts off bad, if it starts off shelo lishma, right? When you started off bad, you do the shechita. Your initial thought of the shechita is that this is going to be for shlamim. You got to tell me that case. Of course it's bad, right? Because even if it's a case where it starts off good and that's bad, maybe you said, oh, since you started off good, you can't ruin it anymore, right? No, but that's no good. So obviously, if you start off bad, shelo lishma, it should be no good. So Allah bevodachas, right? Rather, that must be talking about one in a case of avodachas. And by the fact that seifa is, in other words, when you have shelo lishma and lishma, must be during one avoda, and the chiddush there is that even though that you had the 2 machshavas together, that's the chiddush, right? There was also good intentions in the one avoda. However, since it was joined with a bad machshava, it's no good. So therefore, that's the chiddush of there. But by the fact that the reisha the seifa is talking about during one avoda, so to the reisha when it said it was lishma shelo lishma, the shelo lishma was joined with the lishma. So the says, no, who says that's the case? Really, it's during 2 different avodas. And really, we didn't need to teach the chiddush that if you have during the shechita shelo lishma intentions, when you come to the zrika, it doesn't make a difference. Even if it's lishma, it's no good. So why did you teach us that? And why did you teach us the case? But since it taught us the case of shelo lishma and then lishma, it taught us the case of lishma and then lo lishma, but it wasn't necessarily teaching us a chiddush, and therefore perhaps that also could have been talking about when it was performed, each one performed in its own avoda, and not both intentions were in the same avoda. Fine, Tashma, come and listen. Shachtu shelo la'ichlav. All right, we have a Mishnah which we'll see Mitzvah Shem tomorrow. So it says Shachtu shelo la'ichlav. if a person shechs a Karban Pesach, right, and he does it for people who can't go ahead and eat it, right? That says, let's say they're physically unfit to go ahead and eat it, or let's say he shechs it for people who are not counted. There weren't people. You have to basically have a count of people who are going to eat from this Korban Pesach, and he basically shechted it for whoever wants to come and take it, la'arelim, or people who did not have a bris milah, u'letzmeim, or people who are tamei, puzzle. That case is puzzle, right? Now, hacha pshita b'vadachas. Over here, it's obvious, right? We're talking about it's only during avodah achas in the later Mishnah. In other words, during one of these avodas, he has that. Umideseifa b'avodah achas reishanam b'avodah achas. Matter of fact, the next Mishnah is talking about during one avodah, he has these intentions. So, too, in our case, right? Where because that's he only has one thought. He's doing it for for let's say an aura, right? So since he's doing it for an aura, there's no two thoughts. So obviously, it's during the entire avodah. So to our case, it's also talking about the avodah achas, right? When he has all the intention of lishma shelo lishma all together. So the Gemara says no. Midiyari, who says it's the same thing? Hakadisa. Perhaps that case is talking about one avodah achas, and our Mishnah, right, is talking about shtei avodas. It's not a proof. And Seifa Vadachas Reisha, Ibe Vadachas, Ibe Shtei Avodas. And therefore, you could say that Seifa obviously over there was talking about during one Avoda. But our case, in the Reisha, we're referring to the Reisha, in other words, the first Mishnah, our Mishnah, maybe it's talking about one Avoda or during two Avodas. So let's see, Tashma, 6 lines from the bottom. So, now over there, in the Seifa of the next Mishnah, it actually mentions now a combination. You shech the Karban Pesach, right? For people who can eat, people who can't eat. In other words, let's say there's 10 people, 6 people can eat, and the other 6 people cannot eat, they can't eat meat, right? They're too sickly. Kosher. That case is kosher. Now, hey, chidami, what's the case there? If you're talking about, we're talking 2 different avodos, Tam the Chashav Bezrika, right? So over there, if we're talking about 2 avodas, so the reason over there is because Chashav Bezrika, right? And then maybe over there he was thinking about during the Zrika, during the throwing of the blood, he was thinking about, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do it for these people who can't eat. The Ein Machshavas, the Chashav Bezrika, maybe, and the reason why it's okay is, so over there, right, it's kosher over there, right? Now, why is it kosher over there? It's different than bad intentions. If you're doing it for people who can eat and people who can't eat, right? So what's the reason? Maybe over the time of the Chashav Zrika, maybe over there he was thinking during the Zrika, right? Now there's different levels of Avodah, but one of them is during the Zrika, the throwing of the blood. The Ein Machshavas Eichla B'Zrika, that when you're doing the Zrika, it doesn't matter who your intentions are of who's going to go ahead and eat from the carbon. All right? So even with the Shavas Zrika, the Ein Machshavas Eichla B'Zrika, Hab Avodah Achas. If it's in one avoda, it could go in the shechita, right? But what about during the avoda achas? Let's say during the first step 1 of the slaughtering, that where it does help machshava cyclin, right? Where we do say that it does depend on when you're slaughtering the animal, who's going to go ahead and eat it. And if you think about the wrong people, then you can pass the korban. Puzzle. I we say if you're 50% of the people eating for the korban are not going to eat it, that's okay. That's not a puzzle dika machshava, right? Puzzle dika machshava is for the wrong korban included with another one. But if you just have for some people who can eat, some people who can't eat, that wouldn't puzzle it. So Ella, rather, what do you say? Turn the page on the top. Ella be avoda achas. Rather, we must be talking about over there, referring to the avoda achas. And even during one avoda, you have the machshava of people who can eat and can't eat. So we still say it's kosher over there. And by over there, the seif of the achas, and by the fact that over there is talking about during one avoda, he has in mind for people who can eat and can't eat. Reishanami, so too in our case, when he says he has machshava of lishma and mishalo lishma, it's also during avoda achas. So our answers once again, Midiyari, who says it's the same thing? Hakadisa. Each one's its own case. Safe about achas over there. It could be talking about achas even during the shechita. You can think about 2 different people eating it, and even though one can't eat it, he's too sick. It doesn't pass it. If the reisha, however, in the case of the reisha, there is no proof, and therefore it could be 1 or 2 cases, and therefore the Gemara does not give an answer as to what the question of our Mishnah was, as to whether when he had the intentions of lishma, shelo lishma, if it was each one was during its own avoda, or if they were combined, and therefore it was only according to Rabbi Yossi and not according to Rabbi Meir. Now, we're going to ask another kasha, basically identical to our Mishnah. There's a little caveat. Now, A Korban Pesach is only brought once a year. If you designate an animal, okay, as your Korban Pesach, and let's say you do it today, right? Pesach is, I don't know, what, 2 months away, right? 2.5 months away. You designate an animal as your Korban Pesach. If I want to bring it this week as a Korban, if I can bring it as a Shlomim. I can bring it as a Shlomim because it's really in the category of a Shlomim. Okay, so I can bring it on today. Today is Wednesday. I can bring it as my Shlomim. And it's kosher. It's a good Shlomim. And that's called Shlo Bizman, not during its time. Why? Because the time of the Korban Pesach is only the 14th of Nisan. But if I bring it today, right, during Shvat, the beginning of Shvat, it's only good as a Shlomim. But if I think I'm going to bring it today as a Korban Pesach, it's no good. So basically, if I bring a Korban Pesach, Shlo Bizmano and Shlo Lishma, it's good, right? Which is opposite of Bismano, it has to be Lishma. So now let's see the question. Pesach sheshachtu b'shayimos hashana lishma v'shelo lishma. Now let's say, once again, you're going to bring it over here on today, right, which is not Erev Pesach. And once again, you're going to go combine two intentions. The same two intentions are from we had it on Mishnah, but it's the opposite, right? The Shem Shlomim is the good intention to make it good, and to make it a Korban Pesach would be a bad intention. So in this case, Pesach sheshachtu b'shayimos hashana lishma v'shelo lishma. Mahu, what's the halacha there? Do we say that the fact that I'm also thinking that it's a shlomim can now make it good and erase the fact that I'm thinking I do it with intentions of bringing my Korban Pesach 2 months early, and therefore make it kosher, although or not? In other words, do we say it overrides it or not? Right? In other words, basically, maybe the fact that I'm thinking it's a shlomim is like a trump card. Right? No pun intended, right? It's like a trump card to say that even though I was thinking it was also a Korban Pesach, it would override that. So Kiyasa, Rav Dimi, Omar, so Rav Dimi says, no, I'm reading the Shmaisa Kamei Rav Yirmiyah. One time it says this limit from Rav Yirmiyah, and Hoil Lishach Shiro Bizmano. And one of the rules, since we have Lishma, right? If I go ahead and think of some Korban Pesach during its man on Erev Pesach, it's good. Shelo Lishma, Machshir Shelo Bizmano. And the same thing that if I think it's Shelo Lishma, Shelo Bizmano, i.e., I think as a Shlomim 2 months earlier. So Ma Lishma, HaMachshir Bizmano, Ein Motzi Midei Shelo Lishma, even though on Erev Pesach, if I think it as a Korban Pesach, but if I include it with something else, right? If I include it with bad intentions as a Shlomim, right? It doesn't work. So Af Shelo Lishma. So to over here, Shelo Lishma, right? So too in this case, just like so now it's like this, just like on Erev Pesach, if I think it's going to be a Korban Pesach, it won't override the fact if I also had a thought of Shlomim. So too, during the rest of the year, if I was thinking it was going to be Shlomim, it would not help override the fact that I also thought it was a Korban Pesach, and therefore there would also be puzzle. So this basically the same rule would apply. It's just inverted, Shelo Lishma and Shelo Bizmano. So in other words, he's basically saying the same halacha would apply Erev Pesach, right? Which is Bizmano and Lishma would apply by Shelo Lishma, Shelo Bizmano, that it gets ruined with a passing intention. And a passing intention would be it's the Shem Korban Pesach 2 months earlier. Now, V'Amarli, and he told me, lo. But it's different. It's a unique case because name another korban in the world when you actually have intentions of bringing it for that korban that you originally brought it for, and it ruins it. No such thing. Only the Korban Pesach, right? You set it aside as a Korban Pesach, 3 months early, and if you sacrifice it l'shem Korban Pesach, a week later, it's no good. So since that's a unique rule, you can't go ahead and just say, oh, since by other karbanos it works like this. It's the only unique case. Okay, so Gar says fine. Samai Havila. Okay, so how do you? What's your suggestion? What do you want to? How do you want to answer it? Samarava Pesach sheshachtu b'shayimos hashana lishma v'shelo lishma. So kosher. Now a Pesach though shechted during the rest of the year lishma v'shelo lishma is kosher. Why? So Rabbi wants to say a fairish, right? That if it was shafted in other days of the year, By the way, those of you who have to leave early, I don't think I'm going to get to the mission next page. We're probably just going to go get towards the bottom. So just FYI. Now, so Rava says, so kasher. He says, fat out. He says, no, even though you're thinking it's also for Karban Pesach, you have the postling thought of it's Karban Pesach 2 months early, it's still kosher because it's joined with an intention of being it for also l'shlam. Why? Normally, if you bring a Karban stam, if you bring a stam, it's going to be for the intentions you set it aside for. So if I set aside an animal for a tamid or whatever, I set aside an animal for a toda, it's going to be a toda, assuming I don't have other intentions, while I'm doing it. So so therefore, if I set aside my animal as a Karban Pesach, it's a Karban Pesach. So when I offer it as a shlamim, right, 2 months early, I sort of have two thoughts in it already, right? I have the thought of I just said it's for a shlam, in my mind it's a shlamim now. And I also originally set aside as a Karban Pesach. So it's like two thoughts. And nevertheless, it's kosher. Alma, what do you see over there? Asi shalol lishma, umapik lemidei lishma. So you see over there, the intentions are of bringing it as a shlamim, of shalol lishma, can override that of psachim. So too over here, we would say it's the same exact thing. We would say that even though I have intentions of a Karban Pesach, right, which is basically the default machshava, because I set aside this animal as a Karban Pesach and for a shlamim, so therefore my intentions of doing it as a shlamim 2 months early would make it kosher. So Amalei Rav Ada about Aval Rav. So he says, well, Doma Shani Heicha the Amar Meheicha the Amar. How can you say, right, that stama, right, is the same case as if I had intentions the other way? You're just saying stam, a Karban Pesach, which is set aside 3 months early, is basically offered like a Karban Pesach. But maybe it's different when I say this is for a Karban Pesach 2 months early. Because we have in a case of a person, Karban Pesach, that person goes ahead and he shechs it, right? For people who can eat it and people who can't eat it. Now, but if I only go ahead and intentions of people who can't eat it, right, then it's puzzle. So why do you say why should it be puzzle? It should be that if I just have for 5 people who neither can eat, all of them are too sick to eat. Okay, so maybe you say when I stam shech something, it's for people who can eat, right? So therefore, if I shech it for 5 people who can't eat, so it should be for the 5 people who can't eat, and also in additional anybody who can go ahead and eat it. Ella shani heicha d'amar meheicha d'lo amar. Rather, you can say it must be different. It's a different case to say the basically status quo is what it was originally with, i.e., this is the Karban Pesach, right? Or a case of the piece of those who are eating it, right? In other words, status quo normally is for eaters, but once I have intentions of people who can't eat, they're too sick, therefore those are my only intention in this Karban, and therefore it's no good. So too in our case, shani heicha d'amar meheicha d'lo amar. It will be different in a case of where I say this is for a Karban Pesach and this is for a shlamim, therefore it's no good, versus if I just say this is for a shlamim 2 months early, and even though I originally set aside as a Karban Pesach, that thought is basically in the back seat, and that thought would not pass it. So I'm late. No, how can you compare the two of the case of assuming people are going to head and go eat versus our case? Over there in the case of the Karban Pesach, so as long as I didn't say anything else, I'm assuming, right, it's going with the way I set it up. In other words, if I said it's a Karban Pesach, it's a Karban Pesach until I say otherwise. But over here in the case of the eaters, it's for basically people who can eat. However, I know right? The Asiyachrin Mani Alai. But in the case of eating, it's not necessarily for specific people, because people can switch out. People, before you chef the animal, right? It's not necessarily going to be for these, 8 people, right? Because the Tanai we're going to people can go ahead and leave in other cases, right? Or people can go ahead and go to other animals before it's shechted. So therefore, one does not have the status quo assumption when it comes to the eaters, because the eaters are always switching before the animal is shechted, right? However, in the case of once an animal is designated for a purpose, i.e. for Karban Pesach, then it's not going to be go ahead and moved around. All right, maybe we'll stop here because it starts a new sugya. which basically goes to the Mishnah. So we'll just start that tomorrow. So tomorrow, Hashem, we'll pick up from here. Everyone have a wonderful day and drive safely in the snow. Shkoyach.